This is Uncharted, a series of candid conversations about facing uncertainty. When we are called upon to be courageous, the strength of our leadership is tested. Red Direction has developed the Fast Track Your Business program to help you stay aligned to your business's true north. Jess Dewell is your guide. Jess brings you a 20-year track record of business excellence where strategy and operations overlap. Your path comes from consistently working from this special place, your unique true north. Now, here's Jess.
Welcome, everybody, to this episode of the Bold Business Podcast, Uncharted. We are talking today with Vince Scott, and I have to tell you, it doesn't matter where we're at or what we're doing. Every time we talk about random things. We talk about important things to us. We talk about things that might be happening around the world. And then it was like, oh yeah, we should share this with you, the listeners. So here's how it's going to go down for those of you who are regular listeners. You know, we're going to talk to Vince very openly for a little while. And then guess what? We're going to continue to talk to him very openly in the second half of our program, which is for our Fast Track Your Business subscribers. So keep that in mind because you're not going to want to miss the second half. So check out fasttrackyourbusiness.com to understand how to get those amazing last tidbits that will be available to you. Now, I got to tell you about Vince because Vince is in cybersecurity. And this is a thing that every time I hear the word cybersecurity, I like tense up. What am I not doing? How can I not do it right? Because it does include all those long lost relatives and princes in jail that come to you in your email still. However, it encompasses so much more today. And the fact that the more we're talking about it, the more we're aware of it, the better prepared we can be for ourselves and our businesses. Vince is the founder of Defense Cybersecurity Group. He's helping organizations in every aspect of cybersecurity through compliance, through compliant assessments, and he's also the Chief Security Officer for STI TEC, where he's been putting in and putting to work his security approach. I'm glad to have you on the show today, Vince.
It is great to be here today, Jess. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. I'm glad you laughed out loud when I talked about the email because, people are like, oh, I got that scam, but it's not it's just evolved today.
Yeah, some of them are, I've actually seen some really, really sophisticated ones. For a major Fortune 500 company, I saw one that was literally, it was a person's boss. It looks like the person's boss sending them the email that said, transfer this money. And it was the right spelling. It was the right signature block for her boss. And there was one letter off in the domain name of the email address. And that was the only thing that I could pick off that was different. So they clearly had some of her boss's emails, right? And they had modified that and they had set up a domain that was one letter off from the company and then sent her an email that said, hey, I need you to transfer this money in this fashion, blah, blah. And the company was very upset with that person. And I was like, no, really, you can't, come on. Would you have, if your boss had sent you this, would you have got this? Really? No, you wouldn't have. So you got to have a little patience here. Now, in that case, it was but you didn't follow our standard procedures, right? But and that's good. You need to strengthen standard procedures, and we still need to follow up on it. But it was not Nigerian princes, please send monies, right?
Exactly. It is evolved from that.
Come a long way since then, right?
Yeah.
And so, and the targeting goes down to very low levels, right? So my wife was in real estate. And where we lived, we had individual real estate agents being targeted and then changing the bank routing information for that money you're putting down on your house. And so essentially stealing the deposits on homes by having that money rerouted right before closing. And so you had people showing up at closings going, I wired the money. No, you didn't wire the money. Yes, I did wire the money. Oh, I wired it here. Well, no, you said to wire it there. I never sent you that email. Right. So I really hate that because, you have young families who, saved money so they can get 10% down or 20% down on a house, and they're all excited and they're getting ready to close, and then that money is gone. And really causes, of course, a lot of problems, and really resulted from targeting at a very small level, right? So that those real estate agencies are very small businesses, and people think, oh, I'm just a whatever. Who would ever hack me? Who would target me? And it's anybody who wants a slice of your money. And really, there's a lot of those people.
There are a lot of those people. So when we think about that there are a lot of those people out there, and some are the traditional scams that we just have to get, internet smart about, if you will. Some we can plan for regardless of the size of our business. What are the top 3 things that you recognize in companies that they could, it might not necessarily be easy to do, yet the prudent thing to do to start making changes to become more secure in the way they're handling their information?
I think the top 3. So number 1 would be 2-factor authentication. So lots of commercial banking, etc., now offer 2-factor to you. Some banks are now starting to insist on it, right? But your Google email, it offers a 2-factor, and a lot of people do a lot of stuff and have their banking password reset and a lot of that stuff set up in their Google email account. Put 2-factor authentication on that. Does it make it impossible to hack you? No, nothing does. But it really complicates the life of somebody who's trying to steal your stuff. And so I think absolutely at the top of the list would be 2-factor authentication. Maybe the second thing would be that realization that we already touched on, that you're not too small to be very specifically targeted, right? So any company of any size could potentially be targeted by hackers in order to get a slice of their money, right? And I still do run across a surprising amount of, we're a soap and diaper company, who would hack us? Well, everybody who wants a slice of your gross profits. That's who would hack you. And then there also is, for some people, and I work in the defense industrial base quite a bit, right? Then there's the next level of play, right, which is very advanced nation state hacker organizations. They talk about, we had Sony Pictures Entertainment hacked a number of years ago. They stole and released movies, all because the North Koreans were upset about the movie that made fun of Kim Jong-il, the North Korean dictator. And North Korea has a 6,000 person cyber army, right? So as a company, who has a 10-person cyber workforce, right? You're now playing against the 6,000 man army, and that can be very challenging, right? As you look at your cyber defense. So companies of larger sizes, as you scale up, I think you need to be mindful that there are multiple levels of play in this field. And as you work on sensitive research and development stuff, a lot of West Coast companies who have really cool technology, right? Companies supported by their nations from Asia could be targeting you to steal your very cool technology. And that is something I think, particularly in the entrepreneurial and developmental spaces, people have a hard time really understanding that. No, I have to do things differently in order to protect that information. So I think that awareness is probably the second thing. And then a third thing that people should do in order to better protect themselves. Patch your systems, update, right? So as you get down to micro businesses, patching is maybe not as applicable because they're doing a lot of stuff in the cloud, et cetera. But even Google Chrome comes out with updates. Make sure the updates are in your Google Chrome at the very small level. In companies that run any infrastructure, patching sounds really simple. Oh, okay, patch my stuff. Yeah, download it, patch, no problem. But there's only one problem. A lot of times that makes your stuff blow up. Oh, I patched it. Now this doesn't work or that doesn't work. And, it causes problems in IT. And so it's much more challenging than it sounds. It's easy to say, just do patching. Yeah, great. Particularly that I've noticed it this year in my chief security officer hat, right, where I work with the director of IT, and we have a fairly sizable on-prem infrastructure that we're trying to keep up to date. Oh my gosh, this year has been terrible. Every time I turn around, Microsoft is going, they got me again. You got to patch all this stuff, and then you patch your email server, and oh, by the way, it blows up and email stops working. So now this is a major crisis, and we've got to work all night to get the email server back up, and so patching can be no fun. But I think it's still really important, and even at the local personal level, making sure your Windows updates download and update, and you reboot your machine, making sure Chrome or your web browser is updated, that sort of thing is really important.
Right. How hard, okay, so here's something that comes to mind. And then I want to get to the topic, which I want you to tell us about a problem that you've faced and how you've worked through it. But because I've got you, this is so great. Yeah. We're doing a PSA too, Vince. And that is companies that share passwords. Whoops.
Oh, no one would do that anymore, right? That's so old school.
I don't know about that. It's the first thing I'm telling you. Every company I go into, well, here, let me just give you the password to that. I'm like, what? Let me give you the password. And and I'm not working at defense level. I'm not working with large companies, but these medium-sized companies and these smaller companies, and especially when you get down to the real estate agents, right? The individuals that have their businesses, it's easy to go, hi, admin, take this password. Hi, secretary, take this password. Hi, person who manages the calendar, take this password. And if we have, I think having separate passwords is one of the things that we could all do differently, even within our families, by the way.
Yeah, I certainly, password security that's a great point. Maybe that's something I don't think about so much, but because in most of the places I operate, that isn't.
It's a standard now, right?
Although, in fairness, right, we had the SolarWinds hack. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Right,
yes.
Where the government and many agencies of government, Treasury, Commerce, etc., were hacked as a result of this service provider, SolarWinds, who provides software to the government. In the software server that they had, right? Did you hear that when they briefed Congress, that the intern from 7 years ago had set the password on the server as SolarWinds 123?
Yep.
And it was his fault.
Right.
And I'm like, really? You're going to brief Congress that it's the intern's fault from 7 years ago that password is what it was and it's not updated?
So it can't happen to anybody. Password updates and don't share them.
Right. Password updates and don't share them. Well, and here's a couple of things that latest research says you don't have to update your password more often, right? Doesn't necessarily make things better, but longer is the best thing, right? We talk about complexity. If you can go, I really love Biloxi, Mississippi. That would be if you spelled all that out, that would be probably pretty easy to remember.
Yep.
And really long, because Mississippi is a long word, right? So that passphrase, it doesn't have any complexity potentially. It might be something easy to remember. And in length counts a lot more than complexity. So I've run into companies that go, well, I only had to do a 7-character password, but I've enforced a lot of complexity. That you're not helping yourself.
Right. Make
them longer. I'm not as worried about the complexity because every letter you add in the requirement is a requirement. It makes it more difficult, right? And 8 is not enough.
I agree with that.
8 is not enough. 8 is not enough, right?
Yeah.
8 was when we set the standard for passwords at 8. That was 20 years ago. The modern computing power of a PC can crack a 8-character password in a couple of seconds or less, right? So you really need to be up in that 12, 14, 16 is where I'm at plus. I think that's where you need to be from a password length perspective today in order to have some reasonable assurance that it's not going to get cracked out the gate.
Right. And don't be getting blamed like that intern in the government from 7 years ago.
Yeah, that's just
that was I was like, I thought, wow, way to pass the buck.
Oh yeah, no, it's the intern's fault. Okay,
take responsibility.
So where's your cybersecurity program, and why aren't you ensuring passwords are changed? And hey, why, what do you mean SolarWinds 123 was okay? There's all these things, right? It was sort of like OPM saying when they briefed Congress about why everyone with a security clearance's personal information was stolen, that really they were working on getting antivirus rolled out everywhere in their environment. And you're like, really? You're gonna that's your note to Congress is, hey, we're working on antivirus, don't push us too hard.
I'm telling you, yeah,
amazing.
Totally amazing. And by the way, I will say it's easy to pass judgment from the outside. So I'll just throw that in there for everybody else.
It is.
Don't be like them, but also recognize where you are like them.
Well, yeah, I do think blaming the intern from 7 years ago.
Exactly.
I can wait a minute. I can throw stones at you for that because
agreed.
That is enormous passing the buck. The fact that you went to Congress and said this is the intern's fault. Come on, really?
Right, exactly.
You did that. So I think that's fair to throw stones at. But the other thing to remember about hacking, right, is there are no guarantees, right? Everybody can be hacked when you're working against the 6,000 man cyber army, right? So from a corporate perspective, particularly as you move up the size scale, you need to be prepared on what happens how do I know when I've been hacked and what do I do about it? And I think that's a critical point when you start getting to be 100-person company or above. You really need to be thinking about that. I know it's hard in that ultra small company, right? If you're a 5-person company, maybe this isn't high on your list. But as you move up the size range, you really need to think about how do I know when I've been hacked and what do I do about it?
That's right.
I think that for companies of any size, the detection issue is way underappreciated, right? Okay. Most companies, ransomware, I don't have problem detecting. It puts a little flashy screen up on my face and laughs at me and tells me I need to pay the ransom, right? So the fact that I've been hacked is intuitive to everyone in the company at this point. But that detection piece, oftentimes before the ransomware, you get your splash screen that says I've been ransomed. That happens at human speed, right? Somebody comes in and figures out your network and they're looking at what to encrypt that's going to hurt you the most and how much ransom should we ask for. And it doesn't happen in 6 seconds after the link is clicked. What I often see is actually a pretty significant gap between an initial hack and when that devastating exploitation occurs. And so if you can detect this early and say, hey, why are my internal systems talking to China or talking to Moldova, right? And go, man, that seems odd, and detect that and fix that. A lot of times, I think you can head off that devastating impact because you were able to detect it, you were able to clean it up, you were able to fix it before it became devastating. So I think the detection aspect is one of the things that many companies really miss out on, even at good scale. Significantly larger companies don't understand how hard they need to work at detection first.
Yeah. So I want to know, and this may lead right into from where we're going, but we may also take a sharp turn or go over the edge of the roller coaster. Who knows, Vince? I want to know though, as you've been moving through the companies you work with, as you have been elevating yourself in your career, I would love to know about a time that you had a really difficult time in your leadership position, and if you would tell us about the situation and what made it difficult at the time?
Right. So I think one of my biggest challenges in retiring from the military and then going into commercial practice, right? And initially, when I retired, I was actually working in a relatively military-oriented organization with a lot of other retired military guys, and it wasn't as big a deal. But then I went off to Procter Gamble, right? A global Fortune 50 with its stunningly good reputation for how they treat their people, their leadership. Everybody said Procter Gamble, wonderful place to work. I really struggled because they hired me for my expertise in cyber, and then culturally said, well, we're not sure that you really know anything, and began to treat me like a new college graduate. And that was so hard for me to sort of navigate that culture. It was, we appreciate your service, but we're not really sure how your service as a military veteran actually relates to my company. And I think this is something that many veterans and companies who want to hire veterans struggle with, right? Because there are cultural differences, right?
Yeah.
The military tends to be a high accountability culture. Civilian commercial practice tends to not be as strong on that high accountability thing. Those are tough conversations, and maybe we don't have those as much as we should, right? The military guys and gals have learned to be a very direct form of leadership from their culture, right? See problem, address problem, shortest distance between 2 points in straight line, right? And I may exemplify these characteristics particularly well in my own person, but I think it is generally true, right? Of what we learn from a military perspective. But this problem is not all on the side of the veterans. I also saw in the culture from a commercial perspective a failure to understand what the work environment from a military really brought to the table, potentially from an experience perspective, right? And honestly, I put it down to the Hollywood effect. Okay. Most people, what they know about the military, they learn from Hollywood, right? Something like 95% of Americans don't have a direct family member, or 90% of Americans don't have a direct family member or a direct person that they're close to who's got military service. It is far more people don't really know even a military service member, much less actually serve. I think the actual service is what, in the 3%, somewhere in there. And so for me, I was also saying on the other side, which is like, it's not that different. I have a cubicle and I have a computer and I have deadlines and I have weekly reports, and I have let me tell you, no, really, I had a budget, right? In sort of the attitude of, what could you know? No, you work for the government. What was it like to have an unlimited amount of money to do everything? That's not really the way that works.
Right? Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think my thought was honestly boiled down to, it's a lot of cubicle living, which is a lot like, commercial companies in many instances, right? It's a lot of cubicle living. So there wasn't this extreme delta between my experiences in the military and what we do on a day-to-day basis and big corporate, certainly. But I believe that the big corporate people saw that gap as significantly different, much more significantly different than actually it was, right? And so I think that biggest challenge is the cultural aspect. As a transitioning military member and as a person hiring military members, being conscious of these different cultures and how you bring someone on into your culture. Another thing I think I saw at Procter & Gamble is, because they're such a good company and people go there and stay there, and they're they're not a company where lots of different people move in and out of the company. They had their own cultural blinders on, right? Of Well, of course, this is the way the world works. It's the Procter Gamble way. That's the way things work, right? Because that's all we've ever experienced. So they also have their own cultural biases and box that they sit in, right? So I think on both sides of this equation, transitioning military members, hey, really need to be conscious of how the culture is going to be different and conscious of adapting to the culture that you're moving into. And companies that are bringing veterans in also need to think about how the culture is different and how they help those people adapt to the culture. But they've lived in a lot of cubicles too, right? So it's just a cultural difference, maybe not an experience difference or a value add difference per se.
We will return to Uncharted in a few moments. How you work on your business often means the difference between failure and success. When you commit to developing skills, increasing capacity for the unknown, and prioritizing your mission, you're taking action towards success. Find out more about how to fast-track your business at fasttrackyourbusinesstoday.com. Let's get back to Jess.
I love it that you're really calling out the culture difference compared to the other things and illustrating that difference. Because when you do that, then, boy, it sounds like we could talk for a long time about all of the misunderstandings, the strife, the discoherence, right, that can show up in some of that. Is there one particular that you remember saying that you can attribute to this culture, saying, I actually navigated this with this amazing setup that you just gave us?
Boy, it's so ubiquitous throughout my experience. A place where I navigated this.
Yeah. Or if it's a theme, the theme is cool too.
Yeah, I was trying to think of a specific example that would demonstrate it. I think in the communication, both as a leader and as a subordinate, right? So when you're getting communications from your boss, and if you're a military person who's come in to be a leader, right? The directness that we're used to is not the directness that I see generally in corporate culture.
Right.
Corporate culture tends to be a little bit softer. And so modifying my approach, right, to be a little bit softer with those people who are working for me, certainly, and peers across the table, right?
Yep.
So that direct, very clear, very blunt, a direct addressing of whatever a problem or shortfall is,
right?
Which in a military culture would be okay, that's kind of normal. In a corporate culture, I think you need to approach that in a softer sense.
Yeah.
In the other direction, I'm bringing in military people. I think at times being too circumspect about, okay, really tell me what you want.
Okay.
Might be a good approach, right? So the military person is used to coming in and saying, no, you didn't get this done on time. Tell me why. And let's talk about this and let's get this done because we need it. Or whatever that is, right?
Right.
So I think that communications difference, particularly around directness, would be the example I would use.
All of you type A people out here who can relate to what Vince is saying, even if you've never been in the military, raise your hand for yourself. And
not everyone is type A, right? Everybody talks about themselves as being type A, and there's actually B, C, and D types as well. And really the majority of people actually aren't type A, right? There's a lot of creative, a lot of other kinds.
Yes.
It's funny you bring up type A. I actually, when I retired, I took the Air Force Senior Officer transition course. So there's a regular transition course, and then there's one for old people that are retiring, right? And I got that one. And I took the ABCD personality test, and I forget, it's not Myers-Briggs, it's a different one at that time. And I actually, the guy said, oh, I've never seen anybody score off the chart like that on A. because they did it in two modes. They did it in a regular mode in which I was very type A. And then they did it in a crisis mode in which I scored actually outside the circle off the chart in type A. All my other sensitive pieces, fall off, and then that really we're just giving direction now. But so some of this may apply to me, but I do think it's general to the military. We tend to have that sort of military-esque approach to leadership, and that can be a different culture when you move into the civilian workforce.
For those of you who are listening, thank you very much. This is the Bold Business Podcast, and we are here with Vince Scott. All you Fast Track Your Business supporters and subscribers, head on over to your dashboard. Hear the rest of this conversation there. For the rest of you, we'll see you next time. Okay, Vince, so I want to pick up exactly there. Leaning into those skills that you have, right? That transition, you took this course, you've got this type A, and in crisis, you can let everything else go to take care of crisis. How does that relate to the role that you are doing today? And has it actually helped you, hurt you, been neutral for you?
I think in cybersecurity, and one of the areas I specialize in is incident response. So it's actually what the program I built at Procter Gamble was, how do we know when we've been hacked and what do we do about it? So this concept of we detect that we've been hacked and then we go deal with that. And there's a lot of crisis management aspects to that. So I think me personally, I gravitated towards that and using those crisis management skills.
Yeah.
In a way that was beneficial for the company.
Yeah.
Because that sort of approach is more effective when decisions have to be made. They have to be made now. We have to stop the bleeding for the company, right? No, we really need to decide to take this server down because, and I know the ops guys don't want us to, but we're taking it down because they're stealing our stuff.
Yeah.
Those types of activities, crisis management, I thought was a natural fit for me, and that's a place where I've used that, and I continue to do so sort of across my career.
Yeah. Does that, in those times of crisis, how do you change your leadership these days, or does everybody just know, got it, we're in crisis, show up and let's go together? And they'll be taken care of along the way, right? But there's that different approach of, to your point, of that very blunt, direct, timely requirement to you use the word softer side of communication, and sometimes avoidance and blame shows up there too. How do you mix those two together today to keep everybody moving, especially during crisis?
Yeah, so I think for me personally, right, and we talked about my extreme type A personality, right?
Yeah.
I in some ways the governor comes off for me in crisis, right? I'm able to take off some of the restraints I put on myself.
Okay.
I actually work really hard every day from a day-to-day basis to not let too much of that creep into non-crisis activities, right? How can we be a kinder, more understanding, more empathetic in the day-to-day communications with employees and people you work with and work for and everything else, the group, your team. I think that is one of the most important leadership skills. And that's one that I have to work on a every day. I've been working on it for years. My call sign on a number of times separately developed, I never shared with people, but then I got the same call sign again, was Spock.
Oh.
And it was because no emotion, logical, completely unempathetic, right? But this is not logical. Why are we doing this? And not understanding the emotional aspects of that.
Okay.
So for me, that's just an area where I've identified the shortfall in myself, in my leadership style, right? And said, I have to work on this and I have to make myself better. If you go back to the Myers-Briggs personality type, you have introvert, extrovert is the first characteristics in Myers-Briggs. I scored off the chart or 100% for I on my in-shop to the Naval Academy as a new freshman, new plebe. They made us take that, and I maxed I as an introvert, which was a little unusual, that not sort of the normal mix there, right? And then when I retired, I did, that's another test I took that one again, and I was E and I equal. That was learned behavior over the course of that military career, that I had to work on the E. I had to make it better. And so as you talk about the leadership podcast and the aspect of your, the people that are listening to this, we all have short goals. Every one of us is going to have, we're going to be strong in areas. And because I was 100% I, that means I'm a very small E, right? Extrovert, not so much. So we all need to identify where those weaknesses are in our own personalities and our own leadership style, and then work to buff those. Maybe we'll never be great at that, but we certainly need to work on balancing those things across our leadership style so we can interact well, lead well, bring teams together well, that will support the things that we're trying to do, whatever those objectives are: business, not-for-profit, organizing Little League, whatever it is, where you're, that leader. You have to identify those shortfalls and help mitigate them in yourself. And so for me, I still think I work on it every day to try and be more empathetic, more understanding, because I know in myself that's not my strongest point of sale.
Yeah. I really appreciate that you brought that up and actually used Myers-Briggs as an example, because we tend to take that label and we tend to take that and go, well, this is who I am, take me or leave me, right? And we're really dramatic about it these days in a lot of cases. By the way, I am too. I'll own my drama. This is who I am. If you don't like me, whatever, right? When you have people that report to you, that doesn't work anymore. You still have to be able to be who you are in an authentic fashion. Yet to your point, you've got to actually start buffering some of these things so more kinds of people can relate to you, because the people who are just like you aren't going to be the ones that are on your team. A team is supposed to be bigger than somebody who's doing just what you were just doing.
You want those people who are going to complement you on places where you're weak, right?
Yes.
And so, it's critically important. But I think that for me, the strongest thing is that identifying weaknesses and then working on them. And,
that's right.
And it's not easy.
No. And working on them could just be, wow, I noticed I just did that. Okay. Can't just change what happened, but I can change what happens next.
Right.
Right.
Oh, that phone call didn't go as well. I said that, and I don't think that resonated the way I wanted it to. Ooh, okay.
That's right. That's right. Do I even need to make that call back and fix it right now? Right. I mean, there's an element.
So just like call them and say, hey, I'm sorry, or send them an email note or whatever.
Totally and completely. So talk to me about, it sounds like, and I'm trying to think, I feel like I have to switch this question, because usually I'm like, well, what do you lean into in times of uncertainty? Well, you told us all things come off and Vince Spock comes out, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I feel like I've got to flip that around. So in the day to day, what skill do you lean into that you already have to help you bring that empathy, bring that kindness, bring that curiosity about situations to the table?
So for me personally, I think I'm an analyst, right? And so and you heard that in my talk about Myers-Briggs and all this, right? Yeah. I analyze this very much. Why didn't that work? What is good about this? What isn't? And so I try to bring that analytical piece to the table for the teams that I'm working with, the organizations working with. And I think that analysis then leads to planning, which should lead to execution, right? So my prepared answer for you, what do you lean into in crisis, was chart the course, right? I think a critical aspect of the leadership is, how do I chart that course? And I think that starts with analysis and saying, what are the problems? Where are the rocks and shoals that I need to avoid that I can understand today? Can I know all the rocks and shoals? I cannot. Some of those rocks are hidden under the water and you just got to do your best. But you can avoid some of them. There's some obvious ones, and just running into the obvious pitfalls maybe is not good. So a little bit of analysis, and then how you chart the course. And then from an uncertainty perspective, I think I'm one of my favorite maxims from a military perspective: no plan survives contact with the enemy, right? So no matter how good your plan is, when the enemy shows up, your plan gets screwed up. That's why they call them the enemy, right? So it's important to be flexible and able to change in your plan. It's also important to realize if something comes my way, if some problem, some challenge, does that materially change my analysis, which means I should change the plan? Or is this just the thing? And it isn't fun, but it really doesn't change. I need to keep doing what I'm doing, and I need to do it maybe better or execute better, because this input doesn't fundamentally change the rules by which I made this plan, right?
Right.
And then recognize when I get information that fundamentally changes the calculus, then I have to adjust, and I have to be prepared to go, this plan isn't working anymore. I need a new plan.
Yeah.
Chart the course.
I like that. Very cool. And how about, and then now I like that you shared that answer. I still want the other question too. Is there a trait that you lean into for you to help you know, and maybe it's to help you know that last part? Is this just a thing? Or do I have it right?
Yeah, well, so from a day-to-day perspective, as I've already said, I really focus on my governor to make sure that I'm being empathetic. I'm taking into consideration sort of the EQ as opposed to the IQ aspect. So you're probably familiar with that, but for your listeners, IQ, right, intelligence quotient, we measure that, and a lot of things go off of it. And there's a famous book out there about EQ, which is emotional intelligence, the emotional equivalent of that, right? So how do I take those EQ things into account, particularly on my person-to-person dealings, right? Because I can not be as sensitive on that as I could be. And I need to work on that every day. Every single day, I need to be concerned about that, because at over 50 years, I still continue to get that wrong on occasion. And I want to make sure that I'm fully enabling all the people that I work with, right? So that they feel good about what they're doing and how they're contributing to the mission and all those things. And too much, non-emotional, just square logical stuff doesn't necessarily feed that for people.
Mm-hmm. And so, because you analyze, I'm guessing you also are learning all of the time. Do you have a book or a resource that you go to for learning and inspiration?
Yeah, so I am a huge reader. You can see a few of the books that are on my shelf behind me, because my wife, who built floor-to-ceiling bookshelves all around our living room, and I promptly filled them with all the books. So I do cover a lot of ground in that regard, but I still consider Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People to probably be the best book on leadership, personal development that I've ever read. Anybody who hasn't read it, I highly recommend it. It's in the classic section now, but it is, and they wrote a number of books since then, and I've read those, and I don't think they're as good. Go back to the original 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and the approach that they take to how you make yourself better over time, I think is wonderful.
I appreciate that you've read the other ones and you still like the original the best, right?
Yes.
And to have that context, I am glad that you shared it, because I've also read some of them, and the first one is also my favorite. As is, all the variations of Win Friends and Influence People. That's another one that you'll find in that classic
book is a great one.
And I love that. And I because there's some of the same concepts just presented in a slightly different way. Stephen Covey, for a long time, until I went to a digital calendar, I had that Stephen Covey planner, Vince, where I
Me
used
too.
it
Yeah,
every
I
single
used to
day.
use
Do you
that.
still use it, or did you also move to an online calendar at this
Now,
point?
come on, we have to do everything online now. Digital communications, I have gone to the plain old
Oh, yes.
book that says
Yep.
think, right? And that
Yep.
is my note-taking and action item list. And then the calendar has to be electronic.
Has to be electronic. I'm the same way. I cannot put my tasks online. We might have to have a meeting of the minds about that. There might be something psychological and helpful for people in that.
Yeah, I find it useful for me, right? Of like going back through and saying, so what is
Yes.
still on the task list?
Yes.
And how do I, package that and prioritize it and think about when am I getting those things done? You try to use a similar approach to the Covey model, which was put the big rocks in first, right?
Right.
And make sure you're scheduling time to do these things that need to be done.
Yeah.
I'm not as disciplined about it as I would like to be, but it's the methodology I try to use.
Isn't that great? I like that. That's where I lean into these days. I'm working on that time management piece because it's really what I have found in the last 5 years for me is that I have to manage my energy a whole lot more and then figure out what time is left over to actually get the stuff done. If that's because
okay. Describe energy. What do you mean by energy?
So, and it could be all kinds of things, the things that just take up space in your head. And I'm listening to you and I'm like, boy, I wish I could just like turn off my governor and know what needs to be done and prioritize it, which by the way, I can in crisis, probably not nearly as well as you can, but I do recognize on a day-to-day, that's why I wrote down that thing. Is this just a thing? That's what I'm working on. That's the energy management. Is this just the thing? Because if it's taking up my headspace and it's taking away from my creative time or my thinking time or my strategic time or my planning time, and I've got all these other things like eroding into that, that's the energy I'm trying to manage. Because if I have 15 minutes to do something, if it takes me 10 minutes to get rid of the head trash or what's eroding in the energy or the negative thing that I need to reflect on from a conversation I don't think went as well as it could have, or something from yesterday, or somebody's got something going on and I'm thinking about them, right? That's what I'm talking about, energy. How do you work those in and have space for them because they're there for a reason, yet still be able to go, okay, good, I can manage the energy so that I can make use of the time.
Yeah, you don't want to let those just the things suck your energy, right? You got to
exactly
get rid of that. Let's move on to the things that are really important.
So until we had this conversation, I didn't have a name for it, but now I do. Is this just a thing? Management.
Yes.
I'm going to change it from energy to is this just a thing? Because that's really what it is, so that you can actually use the time and be productive the way you want to be, and to be able to be all in and present for the people who have put time on your calendar or you have made time for in your day. Because that's, to me, that's the worst, the people part. If I show up and I'm really not there.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's harder in the virtual world. It's easier to not be there in the virtual world than it is in the in-person world.
Exactly.
That's something that I think all companies are going to have to, consciously work on managing a little bit more than they did previously. So it's going to be interesting to see how the post-COVID virtual teams thing works. In my current company, I just moved, as we discussed pre-recording, to Pass Christian, Mississippi, because where I was living previously, we didn't hardly go into the office anymore. We had COVID. And we had multiple locations. So even when I went into the office, I found myself closing the office door and being on Teams all day. So do I need to be there if we're really going to do all these things, in that virtual environment? And that's a change for companies, right? And that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out across society and how business gets done over the next, 5 years, let's say. I think there'll be differences, pre and post COVID for sure.
All right. Fast Track Your Business, Voice of Bold Business podcast. You've got it. You're uncut with Vince Scott. See you next time.
You've been listening to Uncharted. Fast Track Your Business subscribers receive access to a vast set of resources, including extended conversations to this and other Uncharted episodes. Visit fasttrackyourbusinesstoday.com.
Your preparedness and the right perspective is absolutely necessary when you find yourself somewhere uncharted. Special thanks to the Scott treatment for production assistance.